Support comes from Mosby Building Arts, creating laundry rooms with improved storage, workspace, and everyday function for one of the home's most used spaces. Inspiration at callmosby.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. St. Louis in 2006 was, in many ways, very different from the St. Louis of today. The same is true of Washington University. Scholar and author Ignacio M. Sánchez Prado knows this very well. 20 years ago, he came to STL to help build up WashU's Latin American Studies program. Fast forward to today, and Sánchez Prado is on his way to starting a new chapter in his career and life at Cornell University. Now, when I say on his way, that is literal because he's come here to our studio to share some reflections on his time in St. Louis before he hops into his car for the drive out to the East Coast. So, Ignacio, thank you so much for making us your last stop.
Thank you for having me.
So, 20 years ago, what was your first stop in St. Louis?
The Arch.
Oh, okay.
Because I came in from Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. So just the drive from the bridge coming from Illinois and seeing the Arch was very taking. Mm-hmm. So I stopped a little bit and then went to my house. And then I was here. I was living in St. Louis.
So those early days, what was your impression then of St. Louis kind of overall?
I mean, I am a big champion of mid-sized cities. I think the quality of life is very good, and that was the case for me when I arrived. It wasn't a city that had such a big Latin American population, so it took a little bit of adjustment. There was only Cherokee Street. Mm-hmm. The population and resources have grown a lot for 20 years, but it was welcoming. And, I always found it a great place to live.
Yeah. Well, you came with a purpose, and you joined Mabel Moraña in building WashU's Latin American Studies program. Why did you decide to take on, that invitation, as it were?
So Mabel was my dissertation advisor and mentor in Pittsburgh.
Ah.
And when the job opened for a scholar of Mexico in WashU, I took it to continue working with her. Mm-hmm. We were inside the International Studies program and also the Spanish program within Romance languages. And she was tasked with building Latin American studies. It was always a small program. We were 10 years within global studies, a few years independent, and now we're inside Romance languages. It was the two of us for many years with a third person. In some of the years, there was a third person, but with a lot of great enthusiasm from students. The intro class grew to 90 students. We have another class with 150. We had an average of 30 majors, sometimes as many as 60. So it's one of those small fields that people don't know very much about, but the students really are enthusiastic about.
Mm-hmm. You were able then to grow it, it seems, on a pretty steady basis. Were there certain challenges, though, that were not necessarily about WashU alone, but in this context of cultural studies around the country?
Yeah, I think that people outside universities don't really know what we do. We have this limited coverage in media that focus on very specific things that get politicized. But the study of Latin America is not a specific ideology. It can run left or right. It has to do with politics, economics, and culture. And Latin America is in the same hemisphere as the U.S., so it's an important knowledge. What happens is most high school students don't know that there's such a field as Latin American students. Mm-hmm. So when they come to college, you have to begin by educating them about what it is, because all the outside information is awful. Mm-hmm. And people have ideas about the politics of the humanities that are inside universities that are not true. They might be the case in very specific corners of the humanities, but the humanities are very diverse.
When you describe the humanities, just broadly, to high school students, for example, how do you describe it?
So we do three things. One is the study of art broadly understood, right? So you have literature, art history, cinema studies, and then you have another field that studies social identities. So that's the women and gender studies and race studies and so on. It's how identities are built socially. And then you have area studies, which study regions of the world. And the last two are also not only humanities, but also social sciences. So that's how I would describe. So the broad study of art, the broad study of social identities, and the broad study of culture.
Is there something in that description that tends to set off a light in people's eyes, like they understand what you're talking about? Do you have to provide some examples sometimes?
No, people understand that there's music and you have to learn how to play it and to understand it. People understand that you have cinema, not only making it, but also appreciating it or learning its history. The social identities is a newer way of studying that has a few decades of life. And those ones are the ones that get more controversial because they have political implications, right? If you argue that gender is a social construction over time, then ideas about whether gender is binary or fluid start to be discussed, and then people start aligning in ideological positions around that. And the same with Latin American culture, right? Some people think the U.S. should intervene in Latin America. Some people think we should be left alone. And those disciplines ask those questions that sometimes have even policy or cultural change implications. So they're not trivial.
Yeah.
And they have to be studied with care and rigor, and we unfortunately don't have that care when the outside media of universities presents only a very limited and sometimes a stereotypical view of them.
That care. You said that students were very interested in what you all were offering.
Yes.
What kind of care did you show or put across such that students were understanding what was going on maybe better than the institutions themselves or the general public?
So I have two kinds of students, broadly, right? There are Latin American and Latinx students who want to study their heritage, but they have a family experience that may or may not have contradictions with actual history and actual economics and actual politics. So to me, it's navigating the separation between their family heritage and sort of the objective study of culture and politics and so on. And then there are students who want to know about the region because maybe they want to work in government or international business or international law. And the quality of information about Latin America or other regions of the world is very low, especially what is accessible to undergraduate students. So for me, it's to cut out the noise and to teach them with good quality sources, with a scholarly background research. But because this lends to political, I have always been clear that it is not my job to harm my political standing, but it's also not my job to change the opinions of my students. So I have had everything from very left to very conservative students coming to my office to talk about issues. And to me, my job is to make sure that all of them get the best quality information so they can decide themselves according to their politics what they think.
When you say noise, what do you mean and how do you cut that out?
Well, media needs headlines, right? And also politics needs positions. So you hear about immigration, we have the birthright citizenship. There's people who have a very, very negative opinion of Mexico because that derives from an anti-immigrant perspective or from stereotypes that Mexico is a poor country, which is not something we have talked in your show before,
yes.
right? And then there's people who have this idealized version of Mexico, when Mexico is a country that has a lot of problems too, right? So to me, I have to show the good and the bad, and I have to invalidate the points that are exaggerated for political gain and to ground them on the factuals, right? And I think that most of my colleagues who work in our fields, and the difficulty is the factuals contradict people's ideologies, and people don't like to be contradicted. So you have to be very careful that if you're going to elaborate an opinion, it has to come from factuals. And I think that professors who teach in fields like mine, we have to make sure we get the factuals right with good quality sources so then the students can have well-constructed opinions on the basis of the facts.
How have you seen students' understanding of cultures, in the world change?
So that changes by country, right? American students are very focused on their identities. So they want to have a strong grounding about their identity. It might be conservative identities, racial identities, religious identities. So they come to fields that study those identities because they want to understand how that happens, right? I think that the problem with that, and it has changed because it's more the case now than before. And the opposite part of that is that the students have struggled to not only be interested, but also think that they have the right to study other cultures. Mm-hmm. So I will have a classroom full of Americans before, most of them white, and now I have a classroom full of Latin Americans, right? And to me, both of them, plus Black people, plus Asian people, plus people from Oceania, everybody should study everything. Mm-hmm. You don't have a right to access to culture or a lack of a right because of who you are. But because the students are so identity focused, that's one of the first things that has changed. The focus on identity and the lanes and who should be doing what is something that is challenging for a discipline that actually wants to invite everyone to study.
Mm-hmm. We're speaking today with Ignacio M. Sánchez Prado. He's the former professor of Spanish, Latin American Studies, and Film and Media Studies at Washington University. We're doing a little bit of a reflection time with Ignacio before he moves on to Cornell University, where he will be the Emerson Hinchcliffe Professor of Hispanic Studies. So you referred to your having been here before, and
yes.
The last time you were here, we talked about tacos.
Yes.
Also, teachers learn from their students too. What is it that you have learned from your students that is specific to identity and something we talked about last time, authenticity?
Mm-hmm. I mean, my students have a very difficult life. Because any college-age student has been just living, their life is defined by crisis, 9/11, the 2009 meltdown, COVID. And they are incredibly resilient, even though they don't know it, and that resilience shapes their view of the world. I grew up in Mexican economic crisis in the 90s, so I have some affinities with them. But I think that there are many stereotypes that those of us who were born outside the U.S. have about the U.S. The U.S. is less homogeneous than people think. It's not even polarized in two. It has a lot of various nuances. And I think that what I learned from my students is that they always challenge my expectations about what their origin means to them, right? No one, I face classrooms that are very non-monolithic. But a lot of the discourse likes to put people in boxes. And I think that the students, what they're here to tell us is that the boxes don't work.
Do you feel that boxes they're reinforced in a particular way in this part of the country, in the middle of the country, than maybe where you were before in Pittsburgh or, on the coasts?
I mean, everybody has them because boxes are a way to organize a complex society in your mind, right? It's also a way to organize people into politics and everything. I don't think they work. Like I have a very strong pride of my Mexican origin, but I also like to live in the US, and I also like the Midwest, and I also like European culture, right? And the thing is that, to me, if an identity empowers you, you should have it, and if identity limits you, you should challenge those limits. Mm-hmm. And the boxing is just different, right? St. Louis is a very black-white divided city. If you went to California, the Latino population is a different factor. There's places where Pittsburgh, where my family-in-law is from, is very defined by working class versus upper class, actually, right? So those kinds of distinctions, I think that they exist because they come from a social phenomenon, but we also have to challenge when they limit us, mm-hmm. or when they polarize us.
The humanities is something that has for a long time been discussed as under attack,
yes.
In crisis. Do you agree with that assessment? Is there something that we're missing?
It's under attack. The knowledge is okay. If you actually look at what humanists are doing, it's great stuff. But the caricature that comes from the media is very harmful. And I think that leads to political attacks between people who think they're useless and paradoxically people who think they're too dangerous and they create too much social change, right? So it should be there or, but it's really people think about two things. And also when the economic hammer comes, the natural instinct of universities is to protect the sciences and the business school and then cut humanities and social sciences. I think this is mistaken because what the humanities do is sort of qualitative, experiential, and cultural learning. And as we're going to be overtaking with AI, there are things about the humanities that are going to be automated like everything else. But the fundamental cognitive capacities that the humanities embody, from reading and writing to thinking critically, to navigating complex social scenarios, to understanding other cultures, there is no AI that is going to come and replace that. So you see that the problem now is that they're closing and reducing the very disciplines that may equip our minds to have skills above what AI is going to replace.
Mm-hmm. How has that been communicated through some of the more recent courses that you have taught at WashU?
I don't allow any computers in my class. I have a notebook, and I think that I like to emphasize process over outcome. So I ask them to read, to take notes, and they have to be able to present out of their notes with no other support. Because the goal with that, besides learning the content of the class, which sometimes is not emphasized enough, right? But the point of that is that the students should not lose their minds to AI. They just like you would still learn how to do additions and subtractions in school, even though you have a calculator, you have to know how to read and think and interpret, even if an AI is going to be able to help you do some of that stuff on the edges. The process should not be lost, and I think what the students are experimenting is a loss, like a generational loss of mental capacities and skills that are going to be very hard to revert if teachers like myself do not take arms into preserving them. Mm-hmm. So it's not that I'm anti-technological. I'm in my phone all the time. But I also read a book a day, right? The technology should not replace your brain.
So what we're talking about is, on one level, value.
Yeah.
Among the students that you have taught, how have they applied some of what they have learned in your courses to the real world post, ivory tower, post university campus?
A Latin American studies major produces graduates in every field, from physicians who work with international populations to people who work in diplomacy and policy, dealing with Latin American and Latinx people. I have many students who went to business beating people with MBAs because they could engage with international business better than someone with an MBA, because that cultural depth is not taught in a business school. It's not their job to teach it, right? Mm-hmm. So I have everything from lawyers to I have a student who works for Heinz Kraft as a vice president of branding. I have another one who works programming Latin American music in Spotify, people who buy coffee for Target in Nicaragua. So you see, the U.S. is a very globally connected country, and the people who have language skills and cultural skills that are now actually being weakened because of AI and all of that stuff, they still have value in nearly every profession. Mm-hmm. Latin America is the biggest source of immigrants to the U.S., and it is also has some of the biggest trade partners, and it is also an area of geopolitical interest. So it is even in the national interest of the U.S. to have qualified people to know about the region. And I think that my students have demonstrated this in the diversity of the professions in which they have integrated themselves.
Even before they get into professions, I mean, there is a tendency, I think, to think about college students, university students as existing only on the campus,
Yeah.
but there's also what happens out in the community.
Yes.
How has what you and Mabal have built up at WashU found its way into community life?
I mean, the Latinx students are very organized. So some of them have everything from musical groups to student government. There have been many who have gone to volunteer with Latino populations in the city. But I think that WashU, as a general institution, has only affirmed its commitment to St. Louis, especially with the In St. Louis initiative from the past few years. So we are too small in the corner of the campus to really be able to jump into that. But, I have gone to Clayton to talk to students about Mexican political issues. The students are really receptive to that. And I am the kind of person that thinks that colleges, for example, could do more teaching in high schools, alongside with high school teachers, as allies of our high school teachers, in all the fields, right? So, but that would still be something to be grown, because you need to be resourced. And if you only have 2 people doing the work of a program or 3 people, it's very hard to also think about what you're going to do in the community, right? It's a matter of resources.
So as you move on,
Yes.
what is it that you're leaving behind that can be developed, that can be cultivated and grown?
Well, my hope is the interdisciplinary programs are always in danger of being closed during austerity. So I don't know. I cannot speak for WashU's decisions, and I think Mabel would be the person to ask about the program in the future because she's the director and has been the director all the time, right? I just work with her. But I just hope it stays. I hope that the ability to take the classes, the ability to major, the ability from students from the business school and the engineering school to come and learn about Latin America, or the Latino students to learn about their identity, remains as an option for them. I will have to say that many of these programs in universities less powerful than WashU are disappearing. Language department studies programs are being cut left and right in devastating numbers, and we're losing. So beyond the knowledge that is being lost by AI, we're also losing entire fields of knowledge because of financial cuts. And I think that has to be reconsidered because universities by name are supposed to be universal, and they have to be able to offer students the broad range of fields and not just the ones that the trustees and the funders on the legislatures of a given point in time think are valuable.
What do you think then presents sort of the greatest opportunity in this moment?
I think we should really tell people what they're losing. I think that if you see the anti-AI sentiment, it's because people have become aware that they're losing something to the technology. And we have to tell them there's something in universities that is already there to help you with that. It's just that you don't know because they have told you something else about them. So to me, it has to begin by explaining people and the public again why the humanities, like the arts, like the social sciences, are to be funded and supported and why they all should be participants in that.
We started this conversation talking about 20 years ago, how things have changed. Some things do not. What are some changes you hope to see quickly when you return to visit here, Ignacio?
San Luis is heartbreaking because it's such a beautiful city with some limits in governance. I have found that it's a very hard region to govern. So I really hope that the governance breaks the divisions in the city and the city comes together to become the city it can be. And instead of the cycle of boom and bust that we have seen in the last 20 years.
Yeah. Last 10 seconds, is there something in your car you're taking with you from St. Louis that you will not part with?
Well, I'm going to have to part with because it's a special, but I'm taking some Red Hot Riplets.
Red Hot Riplets? Okay. You can get big bags of those now at Costco, I saw recently. Ignacio M. Sánchez Prado is a scholar who helped build WashU's Latin American Studies program. He was a former Spanish Latin American Studies and Film and Media Studies professor at Washington University. After 20 years in St. Louis, he's on his way to be the Emerson Hinchcliffe Professor of Hispanic Studies at Cornell University. Ignacio, thank you so much for stopping in. Good luck with this new chapter in your journey.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Emily Woodbury.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.